What if? Tensura melting the eternal frost. Author, JackDaWeb on Wattpad. This story depicts an alternate timeline wherein Velzard attends Walpurgis after sensing Veldora's presence. She subsequently meets our protagonist and becomes interested in him after his display at the meeting. After thinking for a bit, she decides to move to Tempest and becomes a close ally of Rimuru. Rimuru and Velzard will sometimes be out of character OC, as it is unavoidable for this premise. Rimuru, our protagonist, will be more rational and have an actual spine. Velzard, she will not be as cold and ruthless as her canon counterpart. Since Velzard is missing significant characterization in the early parts of the series, the author decided to write his own interpretation of her personality based on the original light novel. Chapter 38, Reshaping the Underworld. Testarosa's POV. John and Violet strolled into the scene, their carefree strides almost mocking the gravity of the situation. There was no urgency in their movements, just an air of casualness. They positioned themselves behind Diablo, who wore an amused expression, clearly entertained by their sudden appearance. It was apparent he had summoned them here. While I couldn't help but feel a twinge of annoyance at their unexpected presence, a part of me welcomed the nostalgia of seeing my old rivals again. With a scoff, I relaxed my posture, letting my head rest against my hand, my hair cascading down from the throne. Doing just great, if I do say so myself. John's voice rang out, her cheerfulness so pronounced it almost seemed out of place in this realm. Nothing quite like getting a surprise visit from this weirdo and having him drag me around, she continued without missing a beat, casting a side eye at Diablo, who chuckled in response. John's carefree attitude was a world apart from Diablo's. While he exuded an air of detached superiority, John's indifference had a different flavor. It was more like a rebellious delinquent who couldn't be bothered with the complexities of the world. Where Diablo's disinterest stemmed from his belief in his own invulnerability, John's apathy was rooted in a lack of care for anything beyond her immediate amusement. To her, everything was just another game. That's lovely. What about you, Violet? I asked, maintaining my air of grace as I shifted my gaze to her. Violet's reaction was immediate. Her lips twisted into a slight sneer as she began to speak. TCH, you're acting so full of yourself now. While you've always been like that, it's gotten worse. She shot back, her voice bitter. I couldn't help but chuckle at her words. I personally don't see a problem. I've always been myself. I responded with mock innocence, watching her grow more irritated at my calm demeanor. Geez, Violet, you're letting her get to you. John chimed in, ever the carefree voice of reason. Despite her nonchalant tone, there was a trace of amusement in her eyes as she teased Violet. Lighten up a little, she added. Violet simply pouted, averting her gaze from us. I sighed, signaling my desire to move beyond pleasantries. Diablo wouldn't have brought himself, John, and Violet here without a reason. There had to be more to this visit than just their usual antics. Shifting my gaze to Diablo, my expression hardened. The light-hearted smile that had once graced my face now vanished entirely, and the change in the atmosphere was palpable. What had once been playful banter now felt charged, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. As I stared at Diablo, the usual arrogance in his demeanor failed to waver. His eyes remained half-lidded, his smirk unfaltering. Yet something in his posture shifted, indicating he was aware of the change in tone. Diablo, what's the real reason you're all here? I asked, my voice now calm and serious. He didn't respond immediately, simply raising an eyebrow as if intrigued by the change in the air. Then, his usual smirk twisted further, revealing his playful amusement. Kufufu, quite stern now, aren't we? He replied, his voice dripping with mockery, though his eyes remained sharp. I held his gaze, my silence pressing on him. The tension between us grew thick, like a storm about to break. It wasn't lost on John or Violet, either. I sensed their growing friction. They both stood a little straighter, a flicker of tension crossing their faces. The weight of my patience was reaching its breaking point. After a moment of intense silence, Diablo finally spoke again, his voice returning to its usual mockingly casual tone. "I brought them to you to prove a point," he said, his words almost at odds with the seriousness of my expression. My eyebrow arched in confusion, my posture straightening slightly as I processed his words. "A point?" I pressed, my voice now laced with curiosity. He glanced at the two demons behind him, his eyes gleaming with an almost malicious amusement. "To put it simply, these two had to see for themselves the new you," Diablo continued, his voice losing its casual mockery. I tilted my head, not fully understanding where he was going with this. "The new me," I echoed, my voice laced with intrigue. Diablo's gaze flickered back to me, his tone shifting into something more fitting. "When I told them that you've been named, incarnated into the cardinal world, and now serve the same master I do, they couldn't believe it. Even after I put some sense into them, they were adamant that you, of all people, would be the last person to submit to another," he explained. I felt my eyes widen, the implications of his words sinking in. So, it wasn't just a matter of Diablo bringing them along on a whim. John and Violet no doubt fought back when Diablo attempted to recruit demons from their lineage. And either during their fight or after, Diablo had told them everything. He had told them about Rimuru, our lord, the one I now served. John and Violet had likely never expected that I, once known as the most prideful demon behind Guy, would fall under the banner of another. They'd never imagine I would choose to serve someone, let alone accept a master. It wasn't so much Diablo's allegiance to Lord Rimuru that shocked them, as he had always been the odd one out. But me, I was a different story entirely. Within the underworld, my reputation was built on strength and pride, and the idea of me kneeling to anyone was indeed inconceivable. I could feel their disbelief, and strangely, a small part of me found it oddly amusing. After all, what else could I expect from two who never saw the depths of Lord Rimuru's might? "So what now? What do you expect me to do with this revelation of yours?" I asked, my voice still composed, though there was an undercurrent of something more dangerous lurking within. The silence between us stretched longer than necessary, thick with an almost palpable tension. Diablo's grin twisted into something more malicious, his golden red eyes flickering with a glow that would end any mortal who dared to look at them. "Simple. I want you to prove your worth to Rimuru-sama," he said, his voice smooth and laced with malice. "A challenge, then." I met his gaze with the full intensity of my own, feeling the weight of the moment settle over us like a storm ready to break. "And how should I do that?" I shot back, a slight shift in my posture. I could feel the anticipation rising in my chest, the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. As I stood, the water beneath me rippled gently, my feet sinking slightly into the shallow salt flats. The soft splashing sound was a stark contrast to the charged silence around us. Diablo's eyes never left me as he spoke his following words. "With your newfound strength, you are to best John and Violet in battle." His words landed like a challenge thrown directly at me. I turned to look at John and Violet, who both appeared more than ready. John's fist was clenched eagerly, her body leaning forward in that brash, uncaring way that spoke volumes about her excitement. Her usual carefree demeanor had vanished, replaced by the burning anticipation of a fight. Violet, on the other hand, looked like a predator who had just spotted its prey. Her grin was stretched wide, and her eyes gleamed with a manic, unhinged light. The realization of Diablo's words struck me, and I couldn't help but let out a soft, almost amused chuckle. I turned back to him, my posture straightening with a grace that only accentuated my regal calm. "So, I am to reinforce your point that by joining Rimuru-sama, they will be able to attain the level of strength we now possess?" I questioned, my voice measured as I awaited his confirmation, already knowing the answer. Diablo's grin widened in approval, his posture relaxed yet every bit as dangerous as before. "Exactly," he confirmed. I glanced back at John and Violet, both of them practically vibrating with excitement. It seemed there was no stopping the clash now, and I could feel the same excitement stirring, even if I remained composed. The certainty of battle was almost a relief, and I could already sense the familiar rush of power, the thrill of proving my strength in combat. As I stepped forward, the salt flats beneath me seemed to hum with anticipation. This would be a battle worth savoring. If we're to fight, then certainly not here. After all, I don't want you wrecking my domain, I said, my voice laced with playful mockery as I turned to John, a knowing grin tugging at the corners of my lips. John let out a chuckle, her usual carefree attitude undisturbed by my jab. Come on, I'm not that bad, you know? She replied, her tone light and teasing. Her response was typical. Despite her brashness and constant challenges, John was never one to take things too seriously. It was her carefree nature that set her apart from everyone else. Then, let's return to where we fought so long ago. That place hasn't seen action in a very long time, Violet suggested, her voice barely containing the excitement that radiated from her. My heart skipped a beat at her words, though my expression remained composed. We all turned toward Violet, our gazes sharpening in recognition of her words. The central chaos. There was no need to say anything more. The name alone was enough to invoke both nostalgia and malice in each of us. It had been eons since we last fought there, not through cunning or manipulation but with our raw, untamed strength. The central chaos was where our power had clashed in a brutal contest, where the land itself had been scarred and twisted by our very presence. A sense of exhilaration surged within me, though I maintained my regal calm. I couldn't help but feel the stirrings of anticipation rise in my chest. Very well, let's go. I agreed, a subtle nod marking my acceptance. Without another word, the four of us shifted in unison, and the world around us dissolved into darkness. In the blink of an eye, we warped to the heart of the underworld, to the central chaos. Upon arrival, I immediately noticed the oppressive weight of the air. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with the stench of sulfur and ash. The ground beneath us was a cracked, blackened expanse of earth, its surface scorched and brittle, as if torn apart by countless forces. Jagged spikes of obsidian rose from the ground like twisted teeth, reaching toward the murky gray sky. Lightning arced across the hazy blanket up above, briefly illuminating the hellish landscape in stark flashes of white-hot brilliance. The skies seemed sickly, a dull shade of gray that hung low as if the heavens were suffocated by the land below. Volcanic eruptions sent waves of heat into the air, making the very ground tremble beneath our feet. The hum of seismic activity filled the air, an ever-present reminder of the power that still lurked beneath this desolate world. No demon dared to set foot here, for the central chaos was a land beyond regeneration, abandoned by the underworld's healing forces long ago. It was a place of ruin and endless destruction, where the only constant was the relentless chaos that roiled beneath the surface. I felt a small thrill stir inside me at the thought of returning to this place where our strength had once been tested to its limits. Ah, it's been too long, I hummed, my voice barely audible over the cacophony of the land around us. Violet's grin widened at the sight of the chaos unfolding around us. John let out a small laugh, her enthusiasm unmistakable. Diablo, ever the calm one, remained unbothered, his eyes scanning the desolate expanse with something akin to admiration and nostalgia. No more schemes, plotting, or sabotaging. For this moment, let us fight with nothing but our power alone. Should I win, you both are to swear your loyalty to Rimuru-sama, I announced, my tone steady but thick with a razor-sharp edge, the words ringing with finality. John and Violet exchanged glances, their expressions shifting as the anticipation in the air intensified. A spark of excitement flared in their eyes, matching the rising energy around us. Heh, I was already interested in the one you serve ever since Diablo told us about him, John exclaimed, her voice booming through the deafening chaos. The fact that you submitted to him just intrigues me more, she added, her grin widening even more. I agree. No matter the outcome, we were going to see this Rimuru person for ourselves. Violet's voice was colder, her words sharp and calculated. But why not have a battle first, right? She said, her head tilting to the side, her smile anything but warm. The manic gleam in her eyes made it clear she was eager for the clash. With a sudden stomp of her foot, Violet leveled herself, her stance unyielding. The tremor from her light step reverberated through the land, as if the earth itself trembled at her presence. My lips curled into a confident, almost mocking smile as I glanced at my two opponents. John, always brash and full of energy, and Violet, ever the psychotic warrior, each prepared to test their strength in the one place where nothing could hide. Fufufu. I suppose I don't mind showing off the levels you could achieve under him, I said, my voice thick with disdain and amusement. With a subtle shift in my stance, the world around us paused, like a person holding their breath for an inevitable event. Consider this a glimpse into what true power really is. The words dripped with malice, as if I were offering them a taste of something they could never fully comprehend. The land itself seemed to pause, the hum of seismic energy beneath our feet barely noticeable in the tense silence that followed. The air crackled with the weight of impending violence, the very earth seeming to hold its breath as we all stood on the precipice of a battle unlike any other. In the blink of an eye, John and Violet vanished from their spots, the sheer force of their departure obliterating the ground beneath them. A violent shockwave erupted outward, tearing through the blackened sands and cracked earth, sending debris flying in all directions. The sheer pressure of their movement carved a massive crater beneath Diablo and me, forcing the ground to collapse under our feet as gravity dragged us down. Though we remained unfazed, the dramatic shift on the battlefield made it clear that this clash would leave no part of the central chaos untouched. From above, the sky erupted into a fiery spectacle of orange glows, each one growing larger and more menacing as it hurtled toward me. John had unleashed an onslaught of nuclear cannon. While it was considered a basic nuclear magic spell, in the hands of a primordial demon, it transcended its simplicity. The searing orbs filled the sky, raining down with merciless precision, promising annihilation upon impact. Each blast was imbued with devastating power, its destructive energy potent enough to reduce even the most robust defenses to ash. To my sides, I felt a chilling presence, sharp and venomous, streaking toward me. A barrage of deep purple projectiles tore through the air with surgical precision, leaving a trail of corruption in their wake. The magic was Violet's, a sinister assault designed to infiltrate, poison, and consume the life force of its target upon contact. Unlike John's unrestrained destruction, Violet's approach was insidious and calculated. Each projectile seemed alive, writhing with malignant intent as it sought to sap the very essence of its victim, leaving nothing but decay in its wake. The combined attacks created a symphony of destruction, a relentless storm of fiery devastation above, and a deadly tide of poisonous malice encircling me. The chaos of their offensive was overwhelming to an ordinary observer, but I was no ordinary foe. My smirk returned as the thrill of battle surged through me. Before their attacks could reach me, I vanished from my position in a fraction of a millisecond. The precise timing of my movement left their spells to collide in my absence, unleashing a colossal The sheer magnitude of the detonation echoed across the battlefield, its power reverberating through the ground like the tolling of an infernal bell. Cracks splintered outward as the shockwaves tore through the scorched earth, sending jagged debris spiraling into the murky gray skies. As I reappeared a safe distance away, I manifested my chosen weapon, the whip of flame. Its emergence was heralded by a sharp, resounding crack that split the air, the sound carrying an authority as undeniable as mine. The ground beneath me bore witness to its destructive nature, fracturing under the force of the whip's searing tip. Without wasting a moment, I surged forward, closing the distance between myself and Violet with unerring speed. My movements were fluid, precise, and relentless, a stark contrast to the erratic, chaotic environment around us. Violet's eyes widened in shock as I closed in, her expression betraying the split-second realization of her precarious situation. However, I wasn't about to grant her the time to comprehend her fate. In a single, swift motion, I lashed out with the whip, its fiery tendrils coiling around her with serpentine elegance. The moment it ensnared her, I channeled my magic into the weapon. Freezing white flame is a spell as paradoxical as it is exquisite. It burned with an intensity that rivaled the sun, yet its touch brought an unyielding frost. Through the whip, the spell surged into Violet, freezing her movements before she could mount a counterattack. Her body was momentarily immobilized, her figure locked in the grip of my magic. A faint chuckle escaped my lips as I tightened my hold. "You should have known better than to challenge me unprepared," I said, my voice carrying an edge of mockery as I swung the whip with tremendous force. Her body, bound and helpless, was flung across the battlefield like a rag doll, the velocity of her departure generating shockwaves at point-blank range. The ripples of displaced air coursed through the terrain, scattering shards of blackened rock in their wake. I watched her figure shrink into the distance, hurtling away toward the jagged horizon of the central chaos. But I knew better than to relax. Even a fleeting advantage against Violet wouldn't last long. She would recover. Her power and ferocity guaranteed it. The trick was using the time I'd bought myself to shift the balance of this fight. 2-on-1 battles were an exercise in endurance and strategy. I might have surpassed my former limits, but even with my newfound strength, taking on 2 primordials head-on was an impractical endeavor. No, I would force this fight into manageable phases, isolating one opponent at a time. My gaze snapped to John, who floated above like a looming menace, her aura burning with destructive energy. Her expression was a mixture of amusement and hunger, the promise of carnage glinting in her eyes. "You've always favored brute force over finesse, haven't you, John?" I muttered to myself, the words dripping with condescension. My fingers tightened their grip on the whip's hilt as I prepared my next move. "Let's see how well that serves you against me," I said, my voice carrying a calm venom. The effect was immediate. John's once playful grin twisted into something unhinged, her excitement transforming into feral malice. With an earth-shaking crash, she landed on the ground, her impact fracturing the terrain in every direction. Shards of blackened rock and dense dust clouds erupted into the air, creating a battlefield cloaked in chaos. The debris swirled like a storm, reducing visibility and turning the already hostile environment into a true war zone. Then, from within the obscuring haze, John's figure emerged. Her movement was a blur of speed and aggression, her trajectory straight toward me with a glowing fist radiating ominous yellow light. "Ha ha ha, I've never been one for hand-to-hand combat. But now's the perfect time to test what I've been saving for you," she bellowed, her voice ringing above the din. The sheer intensity of the energy wrapped around her fist caused the ground to smolder in her wake. "Take this, nuclear strike," she roared, her eyes burning with wild ferocity as she hurled her attack with reckless abandon. The magic pulsing from her hand was no doubt deadly. She had infused her attack with nuclear magic, focusing its devastating power into a single explosive point of impact. There was no time for hesitation. As John's fist closed in, my body responded with a transformation so seamless it was as if my very essence had demanded it. My pristine horns extended from my head, gleaming with a deadly elegance, while my wings unfurled from my back in a grand display of power. Their snow-white expanse was striking, a stark contrast against the dark, chaotic backdrop. Acting purely on instinct, my wings moved to shield me, wrapping around my body like an impenetrable cocoon of divine strength. When John's attack collided with them, the battlefield erupted in a cacophony and fury. The explosion shook the earth, sending fresh tremors rippling through the ruined landscape. Energy crackled and hissed, the impact scattering debris even farther as a blistering heat wave radiated outward. Yet, I remained unmoving, my wings absorbing the brunt of the attack with a defiant grace. As the echoes of destruction began to fade, I felt John retreat, and with deliberate precision, I unfurled my wings once more. The sheer force of their movement blasted away the lingering dust and debris, revealing me in my full glory. My transformed form exuded an aura of supremacy, the radiance of my white wings and elongated horns cutting a stark figure against the ominous skies. John froze for a split second, her eyes widening in what could only be described as surprise. But the shock quickly melted into a wicked grin that split her face. "So, we're bringing out our true forms, eh?" she called, her voice brimming with exhilaration. Her fists clenched even tighter. "I see how it is," she yelled. Without missing a beat, she began her own transformation. In a flash, her body was enveloped in golden light, and in less than a heartbeat, her two sharp horns extended from her head, glinting like molten metal. From her back, golden wings erupted violently, their brilliance contrasting sharply with her untamed presence. The sheer energy of her transformation ripped through the air, parting the swirling dust and debris in a vicious windstorm. For a moment, the battlefield stood still, each of us locked in anticipation of the clash to come. Her aura burned with aggressive intensity while mine radiated icy dominance. The silence that followed was fleeting, broken only by the hum of the land and the crackle of energy between us. "You've made this interesting. Let's see how far you can take this, John," I said, my voice calm yet laced with a sinister edge. Before I could engage, a chilling presence stirred behind me. "How could you forget about me, Blanc?" Violet purred, her tone a blade wrapped in silk. Reacting instinctually, I whirled around just in time to see her fist streaking toward me, enveloped in a venomous purple aura. The glow pulsed with malice, and its sharp sting was unmistakable. With a fraction of a second to spare, I raised my hand, catching her strike head-on. Our hands collided with a thunderous impact, the force splitting the air and sending a shockwave cascading through the broken terrain. Violet's form came into full view. Like John, she had taken on her true appearance. Two pairs of sharp, curved horns adorned her head, each set angling outward with a menacing elegance. From her back, three pairs of leathery, bat-like wings spread wide, their dark expanse blotting out the sickly light of the central chaos behind her. I stepped back, steadying myself as I positioned myself between my opponents. John and Violet stood on either side, their expressions alight with thrill. The air grew tense, crackling with energy, as the three of us locked eyes. And for a moment, the chaos of the battlefield seemed to still. "It's been a while since all three of us entered our true forms, no?" I hummed, my voice calm, betraying none of the harshness of our surroundings. "You can say that again," John chimed in, her confident smirk refusing to falter. Violet, in contrast, let out a snide chuckle, her expression a mix of amusement and condescension. "Can you still go on, Blanc? Don't tell me you're overwhelmed already." Her words carried the mocking lilt of a bratty child, as if daring me to falter. My gaze flickered between them, their eagerness almost infectious. Part of me felt a begrudging amusement, but the rest boiled with irritation. "Would you please stop calling me by my old title?" I began, my voice laced with sharp authority. "From now on, I am to be called Testarossa," I demanded. John's eyes widened briefly before she burst into laughter, her voice cutting through the low hum of the chaos surrounding us. "You'll have to convince us more if that's the case," she shouted, her body blurring out of sight in an instant. The only trace of her movement was the faint ripple left in the air where she once stood. "I hope you can keep up, Testarossa," Violet teased, her grin wide and mischievous as she vanished just as quickly, leaving nothing but the ominous flap of her retreating wings. The three of us exploded into the air, the clash beginning with a force that made the underworld shudder. The still air between us shattered as we collided, fists meeting with bone-crushing power. John's sheer ferocity was palpable, her every strike brimming with destructive intent. Her attacks rained down like meteors, each one powerful enough to obliterate anything unfortunate enough to be in its path. Violet, in contrast, moved with a predator's grace, her strikes laced with precision and cunning. She capitalized on any opening John's chaos created, forcing me to adapt with each passing second. Even against their combined onslaught, I held my ground. My strikes met theirs with calculated precision, deflecting John's ferocious power and countering Violet's more insidious maneuvers. The chaos around us surged, Streaks of energy cut through the murky skies. Blinding explosions erupted with every clash, and the air sizzled from our magic's intensity. For the first time in millennia, the central chaos was alive. Its dormant scars flared open as new wounds were carved into the desolate landscape. The blackened sands below churned under the pressure, cracked earth and volcanic debris launching skyward with every step and strike. John lunged at me, her fist encased in a glowing orb of crackling energy. I twisted to the side, letting her miss by mere inches, and countered with a sharp kick aimed at her exposed side. She blocked with her wings, the impact sending ripples through the ground below. Violet took advantage of the moment, appearing at my back with her claws extended, their poison-laced aura threatening to pierce through my defenses. A well-timed spin forced her to miss, though her nails, sharp like claws, raked against the tips of my wings, leaving a faint burning sensation. My retaliation was immediate, and I conjured a burst of concentrated energy from my palm, forcing her to retreat. Their attacks were relentless, but they followed a pattern. John's reckless power created chaos, while Violet sought to exploit it. Separating them was the key, though it was easier said than done. A massive explosion rippled across the battlefield as John hurled a concentrated blast downward, the force kicking up a cyclone of ash and fire. It swallowed us whole, momentarily obscuring everything. Even then, the fight didn't stop. We clashed in the blinding chaos, the glow of our strikes cutting through the ash like streaks of lightning. For every step they pushed me back, I moved forward twice as hard. Whenever I forced John to falter with a precise counter or disoriented Violet with a sudden feint, I managed to turn the fight into a brief one-on-one. These fleeting moments gave me the upper hand, even as the two coordinated seamlessly to regain control. No words were exchanged now. Our focus was absolute and our movements honed. Every clash of our bodies and magic resounded like thunder, a symphony of destruction echoing through the central chaos. The battlefield itself groaned under the weight of our battle. The desolate expanse was almost unrecognizable, littered with craters, deep fissures, and molten pools where once there was only lifeless ruin. The skies above churned with energy, lightning striking indiscriminately as if the underworld rebelled against our presence. Through it all, I felt exhilaration coursing through me. This wasn't a battle for survival, nor one marred by schemes or subtlety. This was pure, raw combat, a collision of wills and power. Third-person POV. The underworld seemed to hold its breath, the usual cacophony of torment and chaos replaced by an eerie, awe-stricken silence. Three titanic forces collided with a ferocity unseen in millennia. Their battle radiated such power that the central chaos itself glowed with an ominous, otherworldly light. Across the underworld, demons of every lineage and rank found themselves drawn to the spectacle, their endless struggles for supremacy forgotten in the face of this unfathomable display of power. From volcanic plains to frozen wastelands, all eyes turned toward the source of the blinding flashes and deafening roars. Even from thousands of kilometers away, the streaks of light representing the combatants, one pure white, one golden, and one a deep violet, could be seen zipping through the air with incomprehensible speed. Their strikes carved paths through the air, leaving trails of destruction that seemed to tear at the very fabric of the underworld. Each clash between the primordials sent shockwaves rippling outward, demolishing everything in their path. Obsidian mountain ranges crumbled under the weight of stray attacks, and jagged spikes of unbreakable black stone turned to dust in mere moments. Entire swaths of land cracked and shifted as violent tremors resonated through the depths, scarring the underworld further with every passing second. Testarosa's subordinates, who had just completed their task of gathering the 400 demons from her lineage, stood frozen in place. Despite their pride as her chosen elite, they couldn't help but stare in stunned silence. To witness their master locked in battle with John and Violet, primordials whose names carried unmatched weight even among the strongest demons, was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Occasionally, a stray attack or an errant burst of energy would escape the heart of the battlefield, hurtling across the desolate expanse with devastating results. These stray blasts were no mere afterthought, and they tore through the ranks of nearby spectators like divine judgment. Groups of archdemons, beings whose power was sufficient to level cities effortlessly, were reduced to nothing but ash in an instant. Their collective defenses, which could withstand the concentrated efforts of armies, meant nothing against the sheer force of the primordial stray energies. Understanding that even the privilege of watching the battle was a gamble with their lives, the survivors dared not draw closer. The light of the central chaos pulsed with each exchange as if the underworld itself was straining to contain the fury of its three greatest warriors. Every strike reshaped the land, deepening old scars and carving new ones that would be eternal monuments to this clash of titans. From the furthest reaches of hell, demons whispered in hushed tones about the combatants. Words of the primordial demon's unmatched power had always been known among their kind. However, seeing it unfold and feeling the ground quake beneath their feet and the air burn with residual energy further cemented those truths. Now, the entire underworld watched in unified awe. The endless struggle for supremacy, petty rivalries, and territorial skirmishes ceased in deference to the unparalleled chaos unfolding in the central chaos. The battle raged on for what felt like hours to the spectators. The oppressive energy pouring out from the central chaos kept them all rooted in place, unable to look away even as the air grew thick with the residual magic that crackled and hummed in terrifying harmony. Each strike and counterstrike painted the skies with violent streaks of light, their sheer brilliance rivaling the infernal glow of hell's eternal flames. Demons of every rank and lineage watched with bated breath, anxiety, and excitement warring within them. Most had never witnessed anything like this. Seeing a single primordial fight in earnest was an occurrence that never happened again after the deaths of Blue and Vert, so seeing three primordials battling in their true forms was nothing short of legendary. At first, the chaos of the clash made it impossible to discern the alliances at play. The erratic dance of white, gold, and violet light seemed like a free-for-all, a melee of unmatched ferocity. However, as the minutes wore on, the more observant among the onlookers began to notice a pattern. The movements of John and Violet began to align, their attacks flowing together in a way that betrayed their true intent. They weren't fighting each other. No, they were working together, pooling their strength to overwhelm the white primordial. This realization rippled through the gathered demons like a cold wind. Testarosa's subordinates stood taller, their chests swelling with pride. Even with two primordials united against their master, she held her ground with a ferocity that defied expectation. She wasn't the Blanc of old, but someone far more formidable, someone who had risen far above what any of them could have thought. In stark contrast, demons from John and Violet's lineages grew uneasy. Whispers of concern rippled through their ranks. Could it be possible that Blanc had surpassed their masters? The thought was unthinkable mere moments ago. Yet there she was, holding her own against two of her primordial peers. Each strike seemed to carry more weight than the last, the air trembling under the force of their blows. As the battle continued, the already battered landscape of the central chaos became more unrecognizable. Vast craters marred its surface. Obsidian shards lay scattered like fallen monuments, and entire mountains had been reduced to rubble. Then, the turning point came suddenly. A decisive strike sent a powerful ripple through the underworld, and two streaks of light, gold and violet, descended toward the earth in unison, their combined force generating an explosion that shook all of hell. The blast sent shockwaves outward, flattening anything unfortunate enough to be caught in its path. Lesser demons who had ventured too close to the battlefield were obliterated without even realizing what had struck them. When the smoke cleared, all eyes turned skyward. High above the ruins of the central chaos floated Testarosa, her figure framed by the eerie glow of the lingering magic. The toll of the battle was visible. Testarosa's once immaculate white hair was disheveled, and her wings, though still imposing, bore small tears. Her pristine skin had been marred with faint blemishes, temporary reminders of the grueling fight she had endured. John and Violet were nowhere to be seen, their battered forms presumably lost in the smoke of the battlefield below. Testarosa descended to the ground with practiced elegance, her battle-worn appearance doing little to diminish the air of authority she exuded. As her feet touched the scorched and fractured earth, a soft hum of power resonated in the still air. The smoke from their monumental clash began to clear, revealing the aftermath of their confrontation. Across from her stood John and Violet, their figures slumped and battered. The two primordials bore marks of the fierce battle, torn wings, snapped horns, and scorched remnants of their once pristine garments. Their stances, though shaken, still carried traces of defiance, as if they refused to concede completely. The three demons stood frozen in a tense standoff, their gazes locked in silence. The energy that had once filled the air with chaotic intensity was now subdued, though its echoes still lingered in the cracks and craters of the devastated battlefield. Testarosa's piercing eyes flickered, her expression unreadable as she assessed her opponents. John and Violet, though battered, began to regenerate rapidly. Their wounds closed, their wings mended, and their torn clothing knit itself back together. Testarosa herself felt her body rejuvenating, the temporary blemishes vanishing as her reserves of energy worked to restore her pristine form. However, even as their bodies healed, all three knew the truth. The reserves of energy they had left were sufficient for recovery but not for continued combat. A battle between primordials wasn't just about physical endurance. It demanded immense stores of energy, and the fight had drained them all to the edge. For now, the clash must end, and the outcome was clear. Testarosa's victory was indisputable. On the sidelines, Diablo stood as an almost surreal contrast to the battlefield around him. He was immaculate, his suit pristine, his posture relaxed, and his ever-present grin betraying neither strain nor concern. Not a single strand of his hair was out of place, and his golden red eyes gleamed with approval and amusement. "Well done," Diablo finally said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the ruined landscape. It wasn't clear who his words were directed to, but his gaze lingered on Testarosa for a moment longer than the others. "What the hell was that?" John's voice rang out, her disbelief cutting through the stillness of the battlefield. Her blue eyes were wide, her expression a mix of awe and frustration. "Does receiving a name really grant you that much power?" Violet asked, her voice sharp, carrying an edge of disbelief. The two demons stared at Testarosa, their shock palpable. For a moment, Testarosa hesitated. Her crimson eyes narrowed slightly as she considered their words, the truth of their astonishment mirrored in her own thoughts. She'd always known she was formidable, on equal footing with John and Violet, but the disparity in their strengths today had caught even her off guard. She began, her voice unusually quiet. Her hand rose to rest under her chin as she thought deeply. "I don't think so. Even I'm a little surprised," she admitted. Her candid revelation hung in the air. Though all three understood that receiving a name from a superior could significantly amplify their power, none had anticipated this level of transformation. "Kufufu, that's because it wasn't just anyone who named her." Diablo's smooth voice broke the silence, his tone reverent. He took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with pride. "It was Rimuru-sama who bestowed that name upon you, Testarosa," he explained. The three demons shifted their gazes toward him. Their expressions were unreadable, and their silence was filled with contemplation. Finally, Testarosa spoke, her voice soft as if recalling a distant memory. "I suppose I did feel an absurd amount of energy when he granted me my name," she murmured, her eyes widening slightly. "Damn, now I really feel like I missed out," John exclaimed, breaking the tension with a carefree laugh, though there was a trace of bitterness in her tone. "Me too. While we were stuck in hell, you two were living it up in the cardinal world," Violet complained, crossing her arms with an exaggerated huff. Testarosa and Diablo exchanged a glance, their expressions softening with amusement. They both chuckled at Violet's childish indignation. "Does this finally convince you both?" Diablo asked, his voice smooth but carrying a faint note of triumph. John leaned back, her golden wings furling back as a grin spread across her face. Yeah, I'll admit it. You're the real deal, Testarosa," she said, waving her hand dismissively. Fine, fine, Violet added begrudgingly, her voice tinged with reluctance. Hearing her admission, Testarossa smirked, subtly yet noticeably. I'll give you that, but don't think I'll stop trying to surpass you, she said, her eyes lighting up in defiance. The air between the three seemed lighter now, their battle's tension fading into the shattered landscape's cracks. John and Violet, no longer battered, seemed invigorated. There was an undeniable spark of renewed purpose in their eyes. As the two demons turned their thoughts to the one who had managed to gain Diablo and the ever-prideful Testarossa as subordinates, a sense of excitement filled the air. They were ready to meet Rimuru, the enigmatic figure whose name was spoken with such reverence. Chapter 39 Secrets of the Sages. Rimuru's POV. We began our trek up the sacred mountain as soon as Hinata gave the word. As expected, Lobelia barrier couldn't detect nor prevent the use of teleportation, allowing us to warp to the mountain's base without issue. While I could have easily brought us directly to the inner sanctum at the summit, I thought it'd be more enjoyable to walk up and savor the evening breeze. You really just teleported us here instead of the inner sanctum directly, Hinata noted dryly, her tone somewhere between exasperation and amusement. I chuckled, shrugging lightly. What can I say? I wanted to feel the wind for a bit, I replied. Hinata sighed, though there was a faint smile tugging at her lips. Shuna, walking beside me, giggled softly, her expression serene. Fine, Hinata relented, shaking her head as she took the lead. Let's get going then. Right behind you, I nodded, falling into step with Shuna as we followed her up the path. The climb started gently, the wide path illuminated by moonlight filtering through the sparse trees that lined the lower slopes. As we ascended, the city below gradually shrank, its once bustling streets now reduced to a sea of twinkling lights against the dark horizon. With every step upward, the air grew crisper, a cool wind brushing past us and carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of the mountain. The soft howl of the night whispered through the trees, accompanied by the occasional rustle of leaves. Shuna, ever the observant one, glanced back at me with a smile. It's quite peaceful here, isn't it, Rimuru-sama? She said, her voice a gentle melody that matched the tranquility of the surroundings. Indeed, I won't lie. Having your base be at the top of a tall mountain is certainly an intriguing idea, I replied, taking a deep breath of the cool air. Hinata didn't comment but kept her pace steady, her short hair catching the moonlight as it swayed with her movements. Despite her usual stoicism, I noticed her gaze drift occasionally to the view below, a flicker of appreciation in her sharp eyes. As we climbed higher, the wind became more pronounced, tugging at our clothes and carrying the distant echo of the mountain's quiet song. I paused momentarily, glancing over my shoulder at the vast expanse below us. From this height, the city of Lune looked like a cluster of stars fallen to earth, their lights scattered across the landscape. It's beautiful, I murmured to myself, though Shuna must have heard me as she nodded in agreement. It's rare to see such a view, she said softly. Hinata turned slightly, raising an eyebrow at us before chuckling. Are you two going to admire the scenery all night? She asked, her tone playful. I smirked, catching the faintest hint of teasing in her tone. All right, don't worry. We'll make it to the top in no time, I replied dismissively. With that, we resumed our climb, the sacred mountain looming above us like a silent sentinel. We walked in silence for about 10 minutes, the only sounds accompanying us being the crunch of our footsteps against the stone path and the gentle howls of the wind swirling around the mountain. There was something oddly soothing about the quiet, as if the sacred mountain itself insisted on maintaining a sense of reverence. The higher we climbed, the cooler the air became, and I savored the refreshing bite against my skin. The wind, though mild, carried a strange quality. It wasn't just cold, it felt purposeful. Eventually, the few trees that lined the path disappeared entirely, giving way to a smooth stone platform that seemed to appear out of nowhere, illuminated faintly by the moonlight. Standing at its center were the massive doors of the inner sanctum, and I found myself slowing to take in the sight. These doors weren't ordinary, not by a long shot. Towering at least 5 meters tall, they were carved from some kind of dark, shimmering metal that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Intricate patterns covered every inch of their surface, swirling designs that seemed to shift and flow if you stared at them too long. It wasn't just decorative either. These were runes, ancient and brimming with power. Well, that's excessive, I muttered under my breath, though I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Excessive, Hinata echoed, tinged with amusement. Considering its purpose, such fortifications are necessary. Even Veldora would struggle to break through these defenses, she replied, and I nodded in response. Given Veldora's reputation of having destroyed Luminous City a long time ago, I'm not surprised she went out of her way to heavily fortify her place of residence. The entire structure of the inner sanctum looked like something pulled out of an old legend. Its dome-shaped roof was polished to a mirror-like sheen, reflecting the starlit sky above. Marble pillars lined the sides of the entrance, their surfaces so smooth they seemed almost untouched by time. Yet, what caught my attention the most were the magical barriers layered around the structure. I could feel the hum of energy radiating from them. These weren't your run-of-the-mill protection spells. The barriers had a weight to them, an authority that practically screamed, "Turn back now." So this is the inner sanctum, huh? Fancy. I let out a low whistle, glancing at Hinata and Shuna. Neither of them looked particularly fazed, though I noticed Shuna's gaze linger on the intricate carvings of the door. Hinata, ever the pragmatic one, didn't stop to marvel at the sight. She walked right up to the doors, her expression calm but focused. I stayed a few steps behind, taking the chance to soak in the atmosphere. The whole place exuded an air of sacredness, a quiet power that demanded respect. It reminded me of an old cathedral I once visited in my previous life, though that one didn't have magical barriers strong enough to make Veldora think twice. I glanced back toward the path we'd walked, the city of Lobelia now entirely hidden by the mountain's curves. A part of me wondered if this place had always been like this or if it had changed over the centuries. Lobelia was supposed to be a place of faith, but standing here, I couldn't help but wonder, was the faith here based on reverence or fear? A deep, resonant boom pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked ahead to find the enormous doors fully open, revealing the interior of the inner sanctum. A rush of air greeted us, cool, crisp, and carrying a faint, unplaceable scent. It wasn't just air, though. It felt like the very space beyond the doors was alive, exuding an aura of mystery and a power so ancient it almost demanded reverence. Standing at the center of the doorway was Hinata, her posture composed and unshaken, as if this overwhelming display was nothing out of the ordinary. "Let's head inside. Luminous Sama should be waiting for us," she said, her voice calm and steady. Without missing a beat, she walked through the entrance as though it were just another part of her day. I exchanged a glance with Shuna, who nodded with a serene smile before following Hinata's lead. Crossing the threshold was strange. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the air shift around me, heavier and yet somehow inviting. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was undeniable. The doors began to close behind us with a low, grating groan, their massive weight causing a faint vibration in the stone underfoot. I turned my head just in time to see the doors meet with a final, resounding thud, the sound reverberating through the inner sanctum like an unspoken proclamation. "Well, that's not ominous at all," I murmured to myself. The room we stepped into was enormous, yet the atmosphere felt intimate. My eyes were immediately drawn to the breathtaking artwork stretching across the vaulted ceiling. The entire surface was a masterpiece, painted with intricate depictions of Luminous in all her glory. She was illustrated as a radiant goddess, her figure framed by an ethereal glow, her hands outstretched in a gesture of divine grace. Surrounding her were smaller, angelic figures, each painted with such detail that they almost seemed to move. It was the kind of ceiling you'd expect in a cathedral back in my previous world, but this was on another level entirely. The irony wasn't lost on me. The Western nations, staunch in their fear and hatred of monsters, had built their entire faith around worshipping a demon lord. I couldn't help but shake my head internally. If only they knew. It was almost funny, but not funny enough to say out loud. Still, it wasn't just the ceiling. The entire room was an architectural marvel. Towering marble columns lined the walls, their surfaces etched with scriptures written in ancient runes. The floor was a polished mosaic, its patterns forming what I assumed were sacred symbols, though they meant little to me. Every inch of this place seemed designed to inspire awe or maybe submission. As we continued forward, Hinata led us with a steady stride, her every step purposeful. Shuna and I trailed slightly behind, our footsteps echoing softly against the pristine stone floor. Despite my earlier amusement, I couldn't deny the craftsmanship and care that had gone into creating this place. It was beautiful, sure, but it was also intimidating. I wondered how much of that was intentional. Was this grandeur meant to inspire faith? Or was it a subtle reminder of the power held by the one who ruled here? I pushed my wandering thoughts aside. There would be time later to ponder the mysteries of this place and its contradictions. For now, my focus was squarely on addressing the issue of the 7 celestial sages. Knowing Luminous, she might also take this opportunity to bring up her earlier request to borrow some of Tempest's musicians to teach her subordinates. As we entered the chamber, my eyes fell on Luminous. She was sprawled lazily on a plush velvet couch, her arm draped over her forehead as though she were recovering from some great burden. The Gothic elegance of her black dress, adorned with lace and subtle white accents, contrasted with her casual posture. This wasn't the maid disguise she'd used before. This was her true self, utterly unapologetic and commanding in her presence. The room itself was a blend of sophistication and antiquity. The polished stone floor gleamed under the light of a massive crystal chandelier, whose soft glow gave the space a serene yet regal atmosphere. Marble columns flanked the edges of the chamber, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns resembling vines entwined with roses. In the center, a glass table with carved mahogany legs stood before Luminous, its surface reflecting the room's opulence like a pristine mirror. Hinata stopped a few steps from the couch, her demeanor shifting instantly to one of deference. With a fluid motion, she bowed deeply, her voice ringing with reverence. "Luminous-sama, we have arrived," she greeted. For a moment, the only sound was the faint crackle of the chandelier's magical light. An almost awkward silence hung in the air until Luminous finally stirred. She shifted her arms slightly, just enough to reveal her heterochromatic eyes, one a piercing crimson, the other a glimmering blue. Her gaze flitted lazily between Hinata and me, her expression initially unreadable. Then, as if deciding it was finally time to acknowledge us, she let out a theatrical yawn and stretched her arms over her head. Her movements were slow and deliberate, like a cat unfurling itself from a sunlit nap. Sitting up with an air of nonchalance, she rubbed her eyes before fixing her gaze on Hinata. A faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips. "Welcome back, Hinata-chan," she greeted, her tone light and teasing as if addressing a child rather than her most trusted knight. Hinata bowed again, steadfast in her loyalty, while Luminous turned her attention to me. Her smile grew slightly wider, laced with the kind of smugness that only someone like her could pull off without seeming obnoxious. "It's been a while, Rimuru. I take it you've finally decided to deal with those insufferable followers of mine?" she asked, her voice playful but with a sharp edge of amusement. I chuckled, scratching the back of my head. "Yeah, sorry about the delay. Things got hectic after the founding festival." My tone was casual, matching hers, and I offered an apologetic shrug. Luminous waved a hand dismissively, the motion almost regal despite its effortlessness. "Oh, please, neither of us was in any hurry. What's important is that it's happening now," she said. She gestured gracefully toward the couch across from hers, an invitation as much as a subtle request. Taking the cue, Shuna and I moved to the plush seating opposite her, while Hinata settled herself loyally beside her master. The cushions sank ever so slightly as I sat, a testament to their quality. The fabric was soft and luxurious, and even the faint scent of roses that permeated the room seemed deliberately chosen to complement the space's luxury. Luminous, ever the consummate host, despite her apparent laziness, snapped her fingers. The sound rang out clearly, almost commanding the room's attention. Moments later, one of her vampire attendants emerged from a side door. Dressed impeccably in butler attire, he carried a silver tray bearing 4 delicate porcelain teacups, steam curling invitingly from their contents. He moved with practiced grace, placing each cup on the glass table with a slight bow before stepping back. As quickly as he had appeared, he disappeared, leaving us to our privacy. The scent of the tea, light, floral, and with a faintly fruity undertone, wafted up, blending seamlessly with the room's ambient elegance. For a moment, none of us spoke, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. I glanced at Luminous, who had picked up her cup and taken a delicate sip, her demeanor as relaxed as ever. "Well," I began, breaking the silence with a slight grin. "I guess we should get down to business," I continued, and Luminous nodded in agreement. "Indeed," Luminous began, her voice calm but tinged with restrained frustration. "Considering that the topic in question is my own followers causing trouble, I want to get to the bottom of it." Her tone carried the faintest edge, enough to hint at the annoyance bubbling beneath her composed exterior. I clasped my hands together and leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze with a nod. It was easy to sympathize with her. As a leader, discovering that your subordinates or followers were causing trouble behind your back would frustrate anyone. In this case, the consequences could have been catastrophic. The 7 celestial sages, under Luminous banner, had intercepted and tampered with my message to Hinata. Most likely, they'd stripped it down to its most confrontational part, my challenge for a duel, while erasing the rest, which detailed my intent to discuss matters civilly and propose peace between Tempest and Lubelius. If their scheme had succeeded and the altered message had reached Hinata, it might have triggered a war between our nations. I wasn't naive about the outcome of such a conflict. Tempest would have likely emerged victorious, but the consequences of such a battle would have been far-reaching, staining both sides with unnecessary loss and chaos. Tempest would have become enemies with the entire West, killing all prospects of my goal to achieve coexistence between humanity and monsters. "It's fortunate that my message never actually reached Hinata," I began, my tone shifting to a more serious edge. My words immediately captured their attention. Luminous' sharp gaze met mine, her curiosity piqued, while Hinata leaned slightly forward, her expression reflecting both intrigue and concern. Without needing to be prompted further, I continued. "Had the message been delivered, it would have undoubtedly caused a serious misunderstanding between us," I said, turning to face Hinata directly. Her brows furrowed slightly. "What exactly did your message contain?" she asked. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before answering. I wanted to clear the air about Shizu and open a dialogue to discuss a peace treaty between Tempest and Lubelius. The message included a request for a meeting, where I hoped we could talk things through properly. I explained, my voice growing quieter. Hinata's expression softened at the mention of Shizu, her usual stern demeanor giving way to a moment of quiet solemnity. I caught the fleeting sorrow in her eyes, and I nodded empathetically, acknowledging the unspoken weight her name carried for both of us. Though I wanted to reassure her, I decided against it, knowing the gesture of understanding was enough for now. But I also included a clause that if you refused to come peacefully, I suggested we settle things with a duel. I added, and their reactions were immediate. Hinata's eyes widened in shock, her composed yet somber mood vanishing in an instant. Beside her, Luminous rested her chin on her hand, her expression contemplative as understanding began to dawn. After a brief silence, Luminous spoke, her tone carefully measured. "So what they did was cut out everything except your request for a duel," she surmised, her voice carrying a faint trace of disbelief. I nodded, agreeing with her suspicions. "That's the most likely option. They intercepted the crystal ball containing the message, tampered with it, and intended to deliver only the part where I challenged Hinata." I elaborated. Hinata exhaled sharply, her jaw tightening. "I see." and that would have left me thinking that you were issuing an outright challenge, ignoring any attempt at peace," she muttered. "Precisely," I replied. "It was a dangerous gamble on their part, one that could have led to open conflict between our nations. If not for certain events preventing the message from being delivered, we might not be sitting here now," I remarked. The room fell silent for a moment as the gravity of the situation settled over us. Luminous eyes glinted with a cold edge as she considered her followers' actions, while Hinata's expression remained serious, her thoughts clearly racing. Minutes seemed to pass, though it was likely only a few seconds. The tension in the room distorted time itself. Finally, Luminous broke the silence, her voice laced with curiosity and contemplation. "I'm left pondering what their motives are, but also what exactly made them rethink their plans," she said. Her words mirrored my own thoughts. While their ultimate goals remained shrouded in mystery, one glaring possibility as to why they halted their scheme stood out. It's impossible to discern their motives at the moment. However, I do have an idea as to why they didn't proceed with their plan," I announced, earning sharp looks from Hinata and Luminous as their attention refocused on me. "Don't you think it's strange that Hinata and the Saints visiting Tempest happened shortly after Velz publicly declared her allegiance to Tempest?" I asked, my voice calm but deliberate. Their eyes went wide in realization. The pieces were falling into place. The timing wasn't coincidental. Velzard's announcement must have played a significant role in dissuading the sages from continuing their reckless gambit. I leaned back slightly, letting my theory take shape aloud. Think about it. Messing with a nation where a demon lord and Veldora resided is already beyond reckless. But when Velz openly aligned herself with Tempest, the stakes became insurmountable. No matter how ambitious or foolhardy they might be, they couldn't ignore the level of power now present in my nation. It's likely that Velz's declaration, and the fear it inspired, forced them to rethink their strategy. I explained, my voice clear to hammer my theory in. The room remained still for a moment as the weight of my words settled in. Hinata was the first to respond, her voice subdued and thoughtful. "That's..." She trailed off, the gears visibly turning in her mind as she processed the implications. Rimuru and I was right. It was advantageous for Tempest to make Velzard's allegiance public. Shuna chimed in, her tone steady but carrying a faint note of admiration. Her words immediately pulled me back to the first meeting between Velzard and my executives. I could still recall the decisive moment when Velzard, with her usual confidence, insisted on making her allegiance known to the world. Rimuru had supported the idea, stating that the announcement would serve as a deterrent to potential adversaries. At the time, I agreed, though I hadn't anticipated just how impactful it would be. "It was a good call," Luminous said, her voice filled with approval. The announcement of the Frost Dragon would have undoubtedly rattled the sages and prevented them from proceeding with their plan. A declaration like that doesn't just shake the balance of power. It crushes the very foundation of any plots against you, she continued, and I couldn't help but smile at her assessment. She was right, of course. Velzard's public allegiance was a masterstroke, whether intentional or not. It had not only solidified Tempest's standing in the world, but also preemptively neutralized a potential conflict with Lubelius or other nations looking to antagonize us. While we're still not completely sure, it's a theory that makes sense and works best, Hinata remarked, her tone measured as she folded her arms thoughtfully. Shuna and I nodded in agreement, though the lingering question of motive remained unanswered. "That just leaves their motives," I said, my mind beginning to wander through the possibilities. However, my train of thought was interrupted when I felt a subtle shift in the room. A faint presence emanated from behind the couch where Hinata and Luminous sat, though it carried no hostility. In the next moment, a figure stepped from the shadows, the movement seamless and calculated. Emerging into the light, Louis Valentine appeared, his white garments streaked with gold, catching the soft illumination of the sanctum. The attire was undeniably befitting of his status as a pope, emanating an air of authority and reverence. He bowed deeply, his movements precise and respectful, before speaking. "If I may, Luminous Sama," he interjected, his voice steady yet deferential. Both Hinata and Luminous turned to regard him. Luminous, in particular, let out a soft chuckle, her heterochromatic eyes gleaming with playful mockery. "You're not going to greet our guests? How rude," she teased, her tone light but biting enough to make Louis stiffen slightly. Louis turned to face Shuna and me, his expression apologetic as he realized his oversight. I met his gaze with a slight wave, doing my best to suppress the amused smile tugging at my lips. Shuna, ever poised, simply nodded in acknowledgement. Realizing his error, Louis straightened and placed a hand over his chest, bowing again. "My apologies, Rimuru-san. Forgive my impudence," he said sincerely. A chuckle escaped me as I waved off his concern. "Don't worry about it, Louis-san. It's nothing to fuss over," I assured him. He lifted his head, his composure returning as he prepared to speak. "Thank you," he said softly before turning his attention back to Hinata and Luminous. "Anyway, what were you going to say?" Hinata asked, her tone urging him to proceed without delay. Louis recomposed himself, clasping his hands before him as he spoke. "Right? The best way to explain the behavior of the 7 celestial sages is with jealousy," he began, his tone cryptic yet deliberate. "Jealousy?" Luminous echoed, her brow arching slightly as a faint frown tugged at her lips. Louis nodded. "The sages have lived their long lives thanks to your constant blessings, Luminous-sama. It is your divine favor that has sustained their vitality and strength for centuries," he explained. His voice carried a reverent undertone, yet his words hinted at the selfishness lurking beneath the surface of the sage's gratitude. Hinata and Luminous exchanged a glance, their subtle confusion mirroring each other. They then turned back to Louis, silently urging him to elaborate. "It's no coincidence that their behavior changed after Hinata appeared," Louis continued, his tone measured. "When she rose to prominence in Lobelia and began earning your favor, Luminous-sama, the sages grew fearful. They believed your attention and blessings were slipping away from them, drawn instead to her. Their plan was simple. It was to cause a misunderstanding between Hinata and Rimuru-san. They aimed to provoke a conflict, hoping Hinata would either die in battle or be weakened enough for them to eliminate her afterward," he elaborated. His words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and the weight of his revelation settled over the room. I leaned back slightly, my gaze narrowing as I processed the implications. The lengths they were willing to go to, manipulating events to pit Hinata against me, highlighted the depths of their desperation. Luminous, on the other hand, folded her arms, her expression darkening as the truth began to unravel before her. "Those bastards," Luminous muttered, her voice dripping with malice. Her heterochromatic eyes glinted dangerously, and the air seemed to thicken with her building fury. The pressure of her disdain weighed heavily in the room, though I barely noticed it. My gaze shifted briefly to Hinata, who was far less composed. She stiffened slightly, her posture tense under her master's palpable anger. "Should we gather more information, or should we do something about them?" I asked, my voice calm but deliberate, cutting through the tension like a blade. Luminous blinked, her seething rage momentarily faltering as she registered my words. A heavy sigh escaped her lips as she slumped back onto the couch, raising an arm above her head. Her anger receded, though not entirely extinguished. "Sorry about that," she muttered, her tone carrying a rare note of apology. I offered a small smile, waving a hand dismissively. "Don't worry, I understand," I reassured her. She was silent momentarily, her gaze drifting to the ceiling as if lost in thought. Then, with a resigned sigh, she turned her attention back to us. "Hinata and I will deal with the sages ourselves. Consider it my repayment for them causing trouble for you," she said, her voice exasperated as if the mere thought of dealing with the sages was a chore she'd rather avoid. "They didn't actually pull anything off. I suppose we have that to be thankful for," I replied, my tone light as I tried to ease her frustration. Luminous let out another sigh, her arms falling limply to her sides as she reclined further into the couch. Any semblance of formal posture had disappeared entirely, replaced by a relaxed, if mildly irritated, demeanor. "Yeah, but the fact that they even attempted it pisses me off," she grumbled. Her voice then sharpened as she sat up slightly, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Not to mention, they were trying to kill my Hinata," she yelled. Her frustration erupted into the room, her possessiveness laid bare in her words. I bit back a laugh at her outburst, finding her protective streak both amusing and oddly endearing. Of course, I wasn't dumb enough to voice that thought aloud. Beside her, Hinata's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened in shock, and a faint blush crept across her cheeks as she registered her master's declaration. "Luminous Sama," Hinata murmured, her voice tinged with embarrassment as she glanced away, clearly unsure how to respond. The scene played out before me like a comedy routine, the tension dissolving into something far more casual. Even Shuna, ever composed, glanced at me with a faint smile, the corners of her mouth twitching in amusement. As Luminous reclined again, muttering under her breath about ungrateful servants, I couldn't help but think that, for all her dramatic outbursts, she cared deeply for those close to her, even if her way of showing it was unique. "Since you'll deal with it, I guess I should repay the favor," I said, breaking the silence. Luminous turned her gaze to me, one elegant eyebrow arched. Then, to my surprise, she let out a soft giggle as though I'd just made a particularly amusing remark. "You don't repay favors with favors, you know?" she teased, her voice light and melodic. I chuckled in return, shaking my head slightly. "Well, it's about me sending some of Tempest's musicians to Lobelia to perform and maybe even teach some of your subordinates," I said, and her teasing expression shifted in an instant. Her eyes widened, and her entire demeanor transformed, a mix of excitement and realization lighting up her face. "Do you still want to?" I began, but she abruptly sat up, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Yes," she exclaimed, her tone leaving no room for hesitation. "I'd be glad if you did. In exchange, I can send some of Lobelia's top scientists to Tempest to share some of our technology," she offered, her eagerness palpable. Her quick, enthusiastic offer caught me off guard, and my eyes widened slightly. The music festival must have left a lasting impression on her. From the way her excitement bubbled over, I could tell she'd been longing to bring Tempest's music culture to Lobelia. Not only that, but her willingness to send over their best scientists made it clear she wasn't holding back to secure the deal, a deal I wasn't about to pass up. I scratched the back of my head, letting out a surprised, sheepish laugh. "That's good to hear," I said, trying to shake off my surprise. "We have a deal," I added, extending my hand across the table. Luminous eagerly grasped it, her face practically glowing with satisfaction as we shook hands. "When can I expect their arrival?" she asked, leaning slightly forward, her excitement barely restrained. The musicians will need a few days to rehearse their pieces, and I'll have to assign a select few to teach your people how to play and create music," I explained, watching as she hung on every word, her attention as sharp as if I were revealing some grand secret. "I'd say in a few weeks," I concluded as I gently broke the handshake. "That is more than fine, Rimuru." "Thank you," she said, her gratitude clear and genuine. "No problem, Luminous. And please let us know if there are any significant updates regarding the sages," I replied, matching her lighter tone. She let out a soft, almost carefree laugh before leaning back into the couch. "Don't worry about those old heads. They'll be dealt with soon enough," she assured me, her earlier malice replaced by an almost whimsical confidence. With all matters discussed, the four of us enjoyed the last of our tea in relative peace. Lewis had excused himself earlier, leaving behind a calmer air now that the tense discussions had concluded. The flickering candlelight cast soft, dancing shadows across the room, adding a soothing ambience to the otherwise grandiose inner sanctum. Shuna and I rose slowly, signaling our departure. Hinata and Luminous followed suit, their movements unhurried as if reluctant to let the moment end. "I'm glad we got everything settled." "Well, not exactly settled, but working toward it," I remarked, a slight grin tugging at my lips. The others chuckled lightly, sharing the sentiment. Indeed, Luminous replied, crossing her arms. While I'm still pissed about those damn sages, it's satisfying to know their dirty secrets are finally out in the open. Her tone was light but edged with disdain, a reminder of the earlier tension. Shuna stepped forward and bowed slightly, her demeanor polite and composed as always. Thank you for having us, Luminous-san, she said, her gratitude evident. Fufufu. No need to be so formal, Shuna. It's always a pleasure doing business with you too, Luminous replied, her usual elegance tinged with warmth. I suppose we'll see you in a few weeks, I said, turning toward the exit, already anticipating the next collaboration. I look forward to the upcoming performance, Luminous said, her excitement bubbling through her voice, a far cry from the fury that had consumed her earlier. I glanced back, smiling softly. Yeah, well, the hour's getting late. Shuna and I should start heading back. I've kept you both long enough, Luminous agreed, her tone light yet sincere. With a small wave, Shuna and I began our departure. Our footsteps echoed softly through the expansive corridors of the inner sanctum, blending with the distant, faint hum of magical energy that seemed ever present in Luminous domain. The flickering of the ornate sconces lining the walls added an almost dreamlike quality to the walk. The stillness stretched comfortably between us until Luminous' voice rang out, cutting through the quiet. By the way, she called, her tone carrying a playful lilt that immediately set me on guard. I paused mid-step and turned to face her. Yeah, I asked, making sure my voice carried back across the room. How are things between you and the Frost Dragon? She asked, her words dripping with teasing amusement. For a moment, I blinked, caught off guard by the question. Shuna glanced up at me, her expression a mix of curiosity and mild amusement. But I quickly composed myself, letting out a light chuckle that echoed faintly off the walls. Turning back around, I raised a hand in parting and began to walk again. We're doing excellent. Do with that what you will.